I'm gonna make you a world with these two hands today. Put a love, memories and laughs in all that I create.
This zigzag quilt is assembled using columns rather than blocks. It features a quilt-as-you-go method, which makes assembly a breeze. Begin by cutting your batting into 8-inch wide columns. You'll want to use a low-loft cotton batting for this project. It's helpful if you buy batting that is already sized for the quilt you want. My queen-sized quilt has 12 columns. We're going to start by drawing a few guidelines. Align the long edge of a batting column with the 45-degree mark on your cutting mat. With a clear quilter's ruler positioned at a straight 90-degree angle, draw a line 2.5 inches in from the corner of the batting. Move the ruler over another 2.5 inches and mark again. 3 of these lines should be sufficient. The second batting column will need to have lines going the other direction. So position the column on the opposite 45-degree angle and make 3 marks as you did on the last column. You can see that when these columns are side by side, the marks form a center point. As you assemble the quilt, you will alternate the columns, creating an overall chevron pattern. You will need to cut strips to 3 inches by 14.5 inches. You can estimate how many you will need by dividing the length of a column by 2.5 inches, then multiplying by how many columns you have total. My queen-sized quilt required 432 strips. You can use a smaller strip of fabric for this first strip if you'd like. Lay the fabric face down between the first and second lines on the batting column. Align the edge of the fabric with the first drawn line and pin. Sew next to the first line with a 1/4 inch seam. There is no need to backstitch on the strips, as the ends will be secured when the columns are sewn together. Fold the strip back and press. Add the second strip by laying it face down on top of the first strip. Align the raw edges of both strips and pin. Sew together along the raw edge with a 1/4 inch seam. Fold the second strip up and press. Continue to add strips as you did the second strip. The edge of the strip should match the angle of the line you drew on the column. Make sure that you position the strip so that it will completely cover the batting once it is folded up and pressed.
Don't feel afraid to innovate. Don't miss a chance to be creative. Don't. Try this at home. Try this at home.
Once the column is covered in fabric strips, place it face down on your cutting mat and trim off the excess fabric at the edges. Now we can assemble the columns. Make sure you have 2 columns that have strips sewn in opposite directions. Lay one on top of the other, right sides together. Pin along one long edge. Do your best to line up the seams as you go. Sew along the pinned edge with a 1/4 inch seam. Press the seam open using steam. Flip over the fabric and press the front side as well. Continue to sew all of the columns together. There are many ways to finish a quilt. I prefer to use a flat bed sheet for my quilt backing to avoid unnecessary seams. For this particular quilt, I chose to do an easy flip and turn method. Lay the backing fabric on the quilt top, right sides together. Align the edges and pin if desired. I actually skipped the pinning and just aligned my corners and edges as I went, since I'm a confident sewer. Sew the edges of the quilt with a 1/2-inch seam, leaving an 8-inch opening along the middle of one side for turning. Turn the quilt right side out through the hole. Adjust the seam at the edge of the quilt and press to give it a crisp edge. Fold in the raw edges of the hole and press those as well. Top stitch the hole shut with a 1/4-inch seam and continue top stitching all the way around the quilt. Since we did the quilt as you go method, we only have to do minimal top stitching to attach the backing to the quilt top. I chose to use a twin needle to sew down each column, centering the seam between the 2 rows of stitches. I typically like to use a thread that matches the backing, but that's up to you. Wash your quilt and it's ready to use. Subscribe so you won't miss future videos, including tutorials for these applique pillowcases and this iron-on headboard. For more DIY videos, check out Style Hall's YouTube Partnership Network. For written instructions, please visit my website at madebymarzipan.com.
Try this at home.